Hello, welcome to another video from the conscientious biologist, Ben Gallagher. This is disease 4. We look at barriers to infection now. So in the last video, we looked at communicable disease, which means there's pathogens that are floating around in the air or in the food or in water, and they can get into our bodies and cause problems. What this video is about natural barriers that your body has to try and prevent those pathogens from getting into your body and causing problems. This isn't the video about how we fight infection. That's the next one in disease 5. This is just about how your body puts up barriers to prevent those pathogens from causing infection. It's from the GCSE syllabus, and please do subscribe to my YouTube channel if you haven't done so already. Thank you. So we're going to start off with your most effective barrier to infection, which is your skin. It's your body's biggest organ. It covers your entire body. It comes in all kinds of ranges of wonderful colours, but everyone's got a skin that keeps the outside stuff away from the inside stuff. Now, that's not to say that it's perfect, and actually some pathogens can land on your skin and cause an infection on the skin surface. But to make you really, really ill, pathogens kind of need to get through the skin somehow to get into your body. If they get into your body, that's where they can multiply. And once they've multiplied up into big enough numbers to do damage or release toxins and poisons, that's when they're going to make you ill. Now, your skin covers your entire body, and it creates a really effective barrier to that. Anything that's floating around from the air, hopefully is just going to hit your skin. If you go swimming in water that's contaminated, yes, it might touch against your skin, but it shouldn't get in. Of course, there are ways into your body, through your mouth, through your nose, but your skin covers almost your entire body. Now, if your skin gets damaged by a cut or something similar, pathogens can get in. So if there was lots of bacteria in the water and I put my hand in the water that was full of bacteria, I shouldn't get ill from that, unless, of course, I then put my hand to my mouth and ingest the bacteria. But that should be fine. But if I had a little cut on my hand and there was a break in the skin, a break in that barrier, pathogens could get into my body, into my blood through that break, and they could make me ill. But the skin can heal any openings that can occur. Now, you know this because every time when you were little, if you fell over or anything that happened and you cut yourself or you get a scrape, your skin does heal. And that's because of these little things. In your blood, you have tiny little cells called platelets. Now, you may recognize on that diagram over there, you've got red blood cells, the bigger, really obvious ones, but those little purpley ones that I've put the arrows on, those are platelets. Now, I want you to imagine platelets like one of these. I'm sure you've all seen one of these before. This is a little popping corn, a little kernel of corn before you pop it and it becomes popcorn. Hopefully all of you have made popcorn. If you haven't, you really must. But platelets act a little bit like popcorn, because when you cut yourself, you've got a little cut and your blood is now exposed. The platelets in your blood, just like this little piece of popcorn, will burst and rupture and massively enlarge. That's because of a chemical inside them called fibrinogen, which reacts when it comes into contact with the air and with some other chemicals that are in your blood, and they burst and the fibrinogen makes a kind of big lump, just like the popcorn that we see here. Now, with the popcorn, it's starch doing that. It's starch that massively expands. But if you imagine platelets doing something like this, you're not far wrong. And what that means is when you've got that little cut, the little platelets in the blood all start to burst, push against each other and kind of plug the gap. You need some other chemicals in the blood as well to help the blood clot together and those platelets all stick together. But they basically push out, squash against each other, clot together and form a blockage. And when they dry, they form something that you would all recognise. They form a scab. And that scab is a temporary repair. It's not going to last forever, but it forms a block. It makes the barrier whole again, whilst the skin cells underneath do mitosis to make a more permanent repair. So that scab is just a temporary thing. Underneath the skin is fixing itself. That's why you should never pick a scab, because if you pick it off, the skin underneath isn't ready yet. It hasn't done mitosis to make its permanent repair. So it's just going to bleed again. A new scab will form. You do that often enough, it might even form a scar. So you need to leave a scab in place to form a permanent repair. Then the scab should fall off by itself. But how amazing. Your skin is this complete continuous barrier, and it can repair itself. So skin is a really, really important barrier to infection. So let's look then against protecting you from ingested pathogens. So your skin is a barrier against everything, ones that are airborne floating towards you, ones that might be in the water hitting against your body. But let's talk now about ones that you ingest, which means ones that you eat. So this could be on contaminated food, or it could be in water. This is a really, really quick one, because the main barrier you've got here is your stomach acid. So there's a diagram of the digestive system. I've labelled the stomach for you, though you should recognise which one the stomach is. And inside the stomach, you've got hydrochloric acid. Now, that's a strong acid, and it's at around pH 2. So we're talking about quite a nasty acid here. It's enough that it can dissolve metal. It's inside you, it doesn't dissolve you, because in the walls of your stomach you produce an alkaline which neutralizes it right by the sides of the walls, but it's still very acidic inside. Plus, the cells of your stomach multiply very quickly to rebuild and make sure your stomach is always intact to house that hydrochloric acid. But what should happen, any pathogens that are in food or water that you ingest that go down into your stomach, they should be destroyed by that stomach acid. They're not always, it's not foolproof. If there's a lot of bacteria, or if they're in lumps, or if they're inside a piece of meat that managed to get through your stomach without being too affected by the acid, they can get down into your intestine. That's when you can get really bad food poisoning and it gets down into your guts. But generally, your stomach acid is a really effective barrier. Now, you don't need to take a screenshot of this screen yet, because we are going to revisit it in a couple of minutes. But stomach acid is a really important barrier. But let's just move on to the next one first. So if we're looking purely at barriers to airborne infections, so this now, the last one was about things you might eat. We're now talking about things that you breathe in. Well, if you're breathing in, remember we're talking about your respiratory system, and we're talking specifically about mucus and cilia, but I'll explain what those are. So if here's your respiratory system, it's the same diagram that I used in the respiratory system videos, but let's put a few labels on there. You've got your trachea, your main windpipe, which branches into 2 bronchi and then further branches into the bronchioles to spread out through your lungs. Remember, at the end of the bronchioles, you've got the alveoli where gas exchange happens. But if you're breathing, then any airborne pathogens or airborne droplets containing pathogens are going to come into the trachea, down the bronchi, into the bronchioles, and those pathogens potentially could get quite deep into your lungs, and that's where they could cause infection. So the body needs to have some kind of mechanism to stop them getting deep into your lungs, and that's where this mucus and cilia come from. So what I'm going to do on the diagram over there, have a look. You see that little red circle I've drawn? What I'm going to do is enlarge that red circle, so just the walls of the trachea. And if I put that up here, you can see the cells that line the walls of your airways. You've got those cells called ciliated cells. Now, we've come across those before, but ciliated cells are those ones with the very wiggly sort of fingers on the end there. Those wiggly bits, those are cilia. Okay, now you've got cilia structures in the small intestine. If you remember back to when we did digestion, in the small intestine we call them microvilli because their role was to absorb nutrients. Cilia that we see in the trachea and in the respiratory system have a very different purpose, but those are ciliated cells. In amongst the ciliated cells, you've also got these goblet cells. Now, goblet cells are the cells that produce the mucus that you can see I've labelled. So the goblet cells are producing mucus and kind of spewing it out to cover the whole surface. So you can see on this picture, there's mucus sort of right the way up along the sides and all within the cilia. Now that's for really, really good purpose, because what happens is the mucus can trap any little pathogens that you breathe in. So I'm using these little sort of devil faces to be the pathogens. So if you've breathed in and they've come in, as you're breathing them in through the air, they should hit against the sides. And if they do, the pathogens, so bacteria, viruses, fungal spores, should get stuck in the mucus. Now you don't want to leave them in the mucus, so this is where the cilia come in. The cilia sort of waft upwards. All the little fingers move upwards to waft the mucus back up your airways. If you've ever seen at a big sort of rock concert where people dive on top of the crowds and everyone pushes the person around, it's called crowd surfing. That's kind of what the cilia do to the mucus. They waft it and they push the mucus back up through the trachea, up through the bronchi, up the trachea, back up into the back of the mouth here, because that's where you're going to swallow it. Now, that might sound horrible because mucus is literally bogies. It's the stuff that comes out of your nose when you've got a really bad cold. And what you're doing all day, every day, whenever you're breathing in pathogens, which is all the time, they're getting stuck in your mucus, you're wafting it back up, and without even thinking about it unconsciously, you're swallowing, because then you're sending that mucus that contains those pathogens down to your stomach. So this links up to the previous slide. So quickly take a screenshot of this one if you want to add it to your notes, because then we're going to go back to the previous slide and add this on. Okay, right, let's look back and link this into the previous one then. So this is the previous slide. We've said the stomach acid should deal with anything you ingest, but we now know that all the time we're ingesting mucus containing the pathogens. So we can add to this slide that this includes pathogens that were trapped in the mucus in the respiratory system, which were then swallowed. So the cilia, mucus and stomach acid need to work as a complete system. The three are sort of integral to each other to trap and destroy airborne pathogens. You remove any one of them, the system doesn't work. Without the mucus, the pathogens don't get trapped. Without the cilia, you can't move the mucus back up. Without the stomach acid, you wouldn't be able to kill the pathogens. So all three of those need to work together. Now, these two things, the stomach acid and the mucus and cilia, they come up in the exams quite a lot as barriers to infection. So make sure you really understand those ones. The skin and platelets for reforming it is also quite important. But these are really the only key examples of barriers to infection. Take a screenshot of this one, then we'll just look at a couple of last sort of secondary ones, which is the last thing in this presentation. Okay, so lastly, just a few other more minor examples, because there's many other simple things that we've evolved to minimize the chance of pathogens getting into us. So all these little bugs and things like that, there's lots of little sneaky ways that your body's evolved to try and minimize that. So one, we can go back to skin, the first thing that we talked about. We talked about it being a barrier, and we talked about how it can repair itself to keep itself a barrier. But something else really cool that skin does is, if pathogens land on its surface, and one of the first things I said was you can get surface infections, well, the surface layer of skin cells are constantly dying, breaking off and shedding. And of course, when they fall off, so will any pathogens that have landed on you, revealing newer, cleaner skin underneath. Now, you are shedding skin cells constantly. Household dust, if you sort of run your finger along the top of an old bookcase that you haven't looked at for ages, there's dust on there. A lot of that will just be bits of fluff from clothing and whatever, but quite a lot of that will be dead skin cells that have been shed by the people who live in your house, and they floated into the air and floated off. But that skin shedding is a key thing about shedding the pathogens that can land on our skin. Second one, tears. You may not think about this, but tears, as well as lubricating the eyelids and cleaning the eye, tears are also very slightly antiseptic because they're saline, they're a bit salty, which means they can dry out pathogens by osmosis and kill them. So your tears don't just lubricate the eyelid, they actually clean the eye of pathogens. Because if you got an infection in your eye and went blind because of that, if we were wild animals, that would massively affect our survival chances. So tears are another really good barrier to infection. Body hair. So this guy's got a particularly hairy chest, but body hair all over your body, armpit hair, whatever, does also play a key role, because if pathogens land on your hair, then they're not actually touching your skin, where they could cause infections on your skin. So body hair can kind of just help to trap pathogens away from your skin's surface. Last one that we're going to look at is earwax. So we all make earwax inside our ears. It's secreted as a liquid because our body temperature keeps it a liquid, but as it moves towards the colder air on the outside, it goes hard. Now, when it's a liquid, any pathogens that flow into your ears, remember your ears are away into your body, there's not skin covering your ears, there's a hole in your head, or two holes. Pathogens can float into them, they'll get stuck in the liquid earwax when it's kind of deeper in. As the earwax oozes its way out and cools and dries and breaks up into tiny little flakes and pieces, they just kind of crumble out of your ears all the time. So actually, having earwax crumbling out of your ears is part of your defense mechanism against pathogens. Most people kind of clear their ears out and rub it out though, so we don't have obvious earwax there. But earwax is one of your barriers, okay? That's it. Those were just a few last little examples. It's the other ones that are really key ones on your syllabus. So those are the ones that you need to focus your revision on. That's it for this video. So we're going to move on to the really detailed immunological stuff now, and how your body fights infection. We've looked at what diseases are. We've looked at communicable and non-communicable. We've looked at pathogens. We've looked at how your body tries to stop them getting in, but even so, they do get in a lot. We've all been ill in our lifetimes. So what we need to look at next is how your body actually fights back, and that's using white blood cells. So head to that one next. As I said at the start, please do subscribe to my YouTube channel if you haven't done so already. It really helps me to build videos if I've got more followers to watch them. Like this video if you found it useful, and do go and have a look on my Facebook channel as well. There's lots of interesting extra bits of biology on there. Thank you.